Hello everybody, how are you doing? I'm not pointing today. Today we are talking about Kirby. Oh wait, we're talking about Blob, big guy. Very fun card to play. Got him already, played him a few games. Have my opinions of him. So should be an interesting one. There's more archetypes to play with Blob than I thought there'd be. So it should be interesting. Let's get started. All right, we've got Blob here. 6 energy, 4 power, Kirby guy. He has this on reveal, merge your deck into this and gain his total power. So you just absorb all the power of your deck. It does mean that you don't draw anymore. So if there are more turns, if you play this early, you don't really get to do anything else with your deck, but still really good. It also has this extra ability, can't be moved. It's not too relevant. Don't really think I've noticed that ongoing at all, but it is there. It does mean that like Sauron would hurt this card if you are trying to play with Shuri, but it is something you can do. It has a lot of good synergies, honestly. I've been playing with it, and there's a lot of decks that you can kind of slot this in that already have high costing cards. I think that's like generally the criteria of if I want to like focus on a card to recommend day one is, can you just slot it in already built decks, or do you have to like completely design a deck around them? Though you can definitely do that. It is a card that has a lot of like utility and tools just to kind of just play it wherever. Very often you get like very high power if you're building around it, or at least building with it in mind. So this can easily be like a 30+ point bomb, which is just hard to beat in a particular lane generally. So this has a lot of potential to be an annoying card, a strong card. So it is something that I would generally recommend when we are talking about picking up the cards. The reason why I do recommend it is just that it's a pretty flexible card. There's just a lot of decks that can play it, and it's pretty easy to have like this big blob that will win a lane. Now, I will say it's not like OP. There are some techs, and it can also just make your deck awkward, and it can also make your hands awkward, right? If you're building too much into it. But if you are just like adding it into a deck that's already good, oh, okay, by the way, look at this pixel variant. Isn't it just like it's not my favorite pixel in the world. I just have to throw that in there. But if you are just playing it randomly, you could definitely have these awkward hand scenarios. But there's definitely been some decks I've seen and decks I've played where it does perform pretty good. It has really good synergy with Thanos in particular. Since the stones just kind of dilute your deck anyways, it's very easy to have like a functioning deck and then have this blob on top eating all the power left in. So there's definitely some decks built already with it in mind that I would say that this is something you can recommend. It seems like a card that's also somewhat hard to nerf, right? Let's say, like, I don't think it's going to be a problem, but let's say they do change it. Like, what do? You take a power or two off of this. It doesn't really change how strong it's going to be. So I just think seems like a strong card that has a lot of potential. So I would recommend it. So when it comes to the spotlight tiers, looking at this again, I guess I wouldn't change too much. Blob is a good card in my opinion, so you can definitely pick it up if you just want Blob. I will say if you are looking just for Blob itself, it's fine to like wait until the last 2 days or so to really finalize that purchase. But I did pick him up day one already because I kind of knew I wanted Blob, and I was okay getting Ravonna as well. So it is something to look into. But yeah, generally this looks like a fine spotlight guide if you want to follow that. Now, when it comes to some decks to play, we do have a number of them. First one, I would say generally is the Thanos list, right? Thanos with the stones makes this like very easy to build around. This one isn't super focused on Blob, which I think is probably the better way to do it. Just have a deck that can win without Blob, but then sometimes you can play Blob for like 20+ power to win a lane, especially if your deck is like super blob focused, right? It can sometimes be telegraphed. You can still get countered by cards like Shadow King, Shang-Chi if you don't have priority, Shadow King if you do, things like that. So there are answers if you are building completely into that mindset. But if you just have it as like, oh, I could potentially just win a lane if I play this, this is just something to do. So especially if you're a big Thanos player, I do think Blob is a pretty safe addition to kind of the staple of Thanos games. So this one's pretty cool. Next one I think is was made by Dara, right? This is definitely a more blob centric deck archetype. I haven't really played it myself, but you are kind of doing generic Daredevil stuff. Not Daredevil, generic Thanos stuff with Psylocke, Devil Dinosaur, Professor X, Vision, those kind of things. And then you have all these big stats like you're playing Gladiator, Maximus, Shang-Chi. This deck is also kind of built for at least it looks to me like it's built for um the the matchup in mind, like the same matchup, right? Because you can dot Octopus blobs, that's kind of annoying. You can Shang-Chi, you can Maximus reduce their blobs. So Gladiator also reduces their blobs. So this seems like a blob hate deck that also runs Blob itself, right? Like I haven't played it, but that's my takeaway looking at it. But it just has generic like Thanos good cards in there, so kind of interesting list. A lot of people seem to like it, so I decided I'll put it in here as well. Next up, we have Shuri. I think Shuri is a deck that makes sense. So the one thing you have to be careful about if you're going to play a Shuri list is Sauron doesn't work well here, right? If you're going to play Sauron, Sauron will turn off your blob completely since it has ongoings and things like that. So you can't really play Shuri Sauron, but you can play generic Shuri without Sauron, which is still good enough. And if you are having blob, maybe that's enough of a boon for it to kind of stand on its own. But yeah, I mean, if you have big cards, right, blob makes sense, and you want a deck at least initially. You want a deck that's already built because it means you can just refer to the generic game plan if you're like not sure how to play Blob correctly, things like that. So Shuri seems fine. Some list that makes a lot of sense. If you like Shuri lists, I know there are some people out there that do. You can definitely try something like this. You also get the armor, which I think is helpful. I've definitely seen some people like just get Shang-Chi there and it hurts. Next up is Hela deck. Hela's was like the deck I was initially thinking about when I was thinking about Blob, where it fits in, just because you already run these gigantic cards anyways, right? So it just gives you a secondary way of doing something really strong. And it's nice because you don't necessarily need Blob to win, but if you don't get like the Hela thing, something like Living Tribunal Blob could be like a very nice end game to win. So if you're already getting the combo off, Blob isn't doing much, right? Because you know you're playing a lot anyways. But if you are needing like a secondary win condition, right? You have the Living Tribunal into Blob, you have Iron Man into Tribunal. There's quite a number of ways to get these big power cards out. So I think it's a nice little addition if you like playing Hela. It makes sense to me. So definitely try it out if you like. And the last deck I have here is just a generic ramp, no Hela, just playing ramp in general. Since ramp just tends to have higher cost cards, it makes sense that you can take advantage of the higher cost card by having Blob. And it's interesting, right? You have the Zola as well, so you can get this huge blob and then copy it, right? You don't have to um like usually it's hard to get the copies of Blob since it's not like huge power, but here you can definitely do that. So there's a lot of generic good cards in here that just makes sense. So definitely try it out if you like ramp. I will say ramp in essence isn't doing super well just because there's a lot of like people that don't like you're not like Sandman right now isn't doing that much. A lot of people have like blobs themselves and stuff, so it's not like your Sandman's really affecting them as much as you'd want it to be, right? Like back when the meta was like heavy balance and stuff like that, you could do more with Sandman. I will say like this is just a meta concern. Like right now, Sandman isn't like the best tool to like shut down your opponent. So something to keep in mind. But overall, like those are the ideas of Blob. I do recommend the card. I do think it has a lot of potential, and it's a card that I just think we'll see a lot of play moving forward. So that's my reason why I'd recommend it. It's just a card I think you'll be like, ooh, maybe I want Blob now. Like even if you know you look at it right now and you're like, oh, I don't really need Blob. Maybe later in the future there'll be like this deck that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot of potential for there to just be a deck where Blob just makes so much sense. And then it's like, oh, maybe I should have picked up Blob. So that's my takeaway. But yeah, pretty good card. It's not necessarily for everyone or for every deck, but if you do like playing big cards, it obviously makes sense for you. So yeah, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful day.
Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be improving. How you doing? You'll hit infinity and won't go back.